It is Wednesday, December 21st, 2021. This is the Fantasy Finish Line podcast. Tonight is the Week 16 NFL preview. Time to flex.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, Jason. Back again. A little earlier than normal.
A little earlier. Maybe we'll get a little bit of participation from the audience live. That would be always welcome.
We are going to have audience questions later in the broadcast. So if you have some or want to grab some information from your leagues to formulate a question, please do so. If you're listening on the podcast bands instead of on YouTube, you can send it via email to jason@drinkfive.com or dave@drinkfive.com.
Excellent. So, yeah, this is the Fantasy Finish Line podcast. I am Jason. Across from me here is Dave, as always. So we just wanted to thank you guys for listening. Remind you, go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, and follow us on Twitter. The usual stuff. We'll boilerplate that at some point in our lives, I'm sure.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think we've talked about this. I think that that next year, for example, that we'll just have a 25-second intro that says all that stuff.
Okay.
But you've said it so many times now that you probably it comes up in your dreams, maybe nightmares, depending on how.
Every Wednesday morning, I wake up just murmuring it in my sleep. So, Dave, what is it that you've got to drink over there? We've got a little bit of the same this time around. So it looks like red wine.
I have
I don't know what kind of red wine it is.
My fiance and I have an advent calendar that's all wine. There are 375 milliliter bottles. This particular wine, and there are wines of all kinds that we open up, is a Spanish red. I think it's a Tempranillo, but I am not absolutely sure about that. But we have gotten into wines over the past several years, and so this was a fun advent calendar thing to do. Of course, I'm not letting the beers go by. So I have a couple of New Glarus beers that are available.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yes, we've got the Fat Squirrel. We've also got the Blueberry Cocoa Stout. We enjoyed both of those over the weekend while we were skiing, and that Blueberry Cocoa Stout especially is excellent. And I really like this red wine, too. I think I like the Spanish reds for sure.
Okay.
So finally starting to understand a few of the things in wine that I like.
Claro que sí.
Yeah. I'll just have to drink more wine to learn more about it.
And that's it, isn't it? To understand and learn more about beer, you must drink more beer. To understand and learn more about whiskey, you must drink more whiskey. And I am a fan of that philosophy.
All right. What a wonderful cycle we found ourselves in. So, last week we did a bet. It was our first bet in quite a while. And we set lineups, which is sort of like our standard bet lately this year. So we essentially drafted lineups based on Dave's rankings, which you can find on our website, drinkfive.com. Dave is one of the Fantasy Pros experts, where, when you go to the Fantasy Pros and all the experts are aggregated and they come to a consensus, he's one of them. But in order to see just Dave's rankings, which are quite good, then you need to go to our website. So what we did was we picked guys that were clustered together and, drafted them. And I finally came out on top of it on bet this year. I think it's the first one of the year that I've won. My starting lineup of Patrick Mahomes, Javonte Williams, Mike Williams, and Dallas Goedert netted me 64.1 points. Good for a 21-point victory.
Congratulations.
So it, got me some pizza today. Very happy about that.
And to be fair, the bet was pick three really sandwiched together, close in the rankings guys, which is kind of a fun way to do it.
Right.
But all very dependent on the variables that happen afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And for the most part, these guys performed similar. Like the three running backs, Javonte Williams, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Saquon Barkley, all scored between 7.4 and 10.1 points.
Good, they should.
And then the three wide receivers, Van Jefferson, Mike Williams, and Terry McLaurin, between 4.3 and 6.4 points. So they were all disappointing.
Well, we know, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this specifically, but that information is probably in your statistically inaccurate
That's a good spin-off column.
Well, what is the name of the column?
Statistically insignificant.
Insignificant column that's on drinkfive.com. I assume you talked about the fact that this past week 15 in fantasy football, was one of the lowest scoring weeks of all time in NFL history.
I don't think I actually brought that up.
Okay.
It sort of happened, coincidentally, because what you saw is that the top running back and the top quarterback were owned in 13 and 14% of flea flicker leagues, respectively.
Yeah.
And I don't think that changed based on Tuesday's games. So, that was really just something that and then, like, Tom Brady threw the 48 pass attempts and had 0 points. 0 real points, not fantasy points.
This is one of those times where I would really like to have access to the data that a lot of the fantasy league sites have, so that you could do a little bit of analysis to see, for example, were most of the teams that were projected to win the games in the first round of the fantasy playoffs actually the ones that didn't win because of the shakeup that occurred this week?
Yeah.
Or was there some other conclusion that you could draw? But I think we always say things like there's been a ton of injuries, there's never been this many injuries, there's never been this many touchdowns, whatever. This is something that's actually backed up factually, that this past week has been the lowest scoring fantasy week of maybe all time.
Yeah. I mean, I know that it was the fewest number of touchdowns on an NFL Sunday that was reported by Scott Hansen, and it didn't change on Sunday Night Football because they didn't score any touchdowns on Sunday night.
But there were 3 games that were moved to Monday and Tuesday.
That's true, but in any given bye week, you're usually down by 3 games. Yeah. So it wasn't any different than a lot of weeks in the NFL.
So it was rough sledding, confirmed by Mr. Hansen.
Yes, definitely confirmed by him. And, anecdotally speaking, you brought up, our teams losing that were supposed to win and stuff. And on Reddit, I saw there was a lot of guys who were, like, in their number 1 seed, and they're like, I'm glad I had the bye because look what my team did. They scored 60 points this week.
Yeah, exactly. If there was a good week to have a bye week, this was probably it, where everything was just in chaos. And it was a lot of fun being out there dodging flaming embers and, trying to make a life for yourself among the post-apocalyptic world that we live in now.
All week long, you're just wondering, like, okay, I'm going to load Roto World every 30 minutes and find another player on the COVID list.
Yeah, it was something.
It's like you just hear a cough in the distance and another player has gone down.
And they're going down, folks.
Yes.
But thankfully that the number of players that have gone down, that sort of line that just kept moving across has started to die down a little bit. A lot having to do with, I think, the adjusted rules that the NFL put out there.
Yeah, they've changed the protocols. I don't know them all exactly. I believe part of it has to do with vaccinated players are not being tested on a regular basis anymore, only if they're exposed, I believe, or showing symptoms.
There's still random testing, but yes, what you said is accurate.
Okay. So, like, when a player has a good game, they're going to get tested for COVID.
Isn't that how it always works?
Kind of like the steroid testing.
Yeah. So it was like, I don't know, Julian Edelman. You had 3 games in a row where you had 12 receptions.
Yeah.
You clearly are on something.
Right.
There's a lot of guarana in your system. But yeah, so the results of the bet are in. You win, and the result was pizza, and I hope that was good for you.
I was very happy with the pizza.
All right.
So I want to get into a sort of procedural issue that I noticed across most of my leagues this week before we dive into our normal things, and that's that people aren't using the flex/superflex position correctly. So we've been involved in fantasy football for years. I've been probably playing for 12 years. And playing other fantasy leagues longer than that. So what surprises me is that people still don't use the flex position correctly.
So when you go through your lineup, let's say on like a Wednesday after the waivers have gone through, assuming that your league has waivers that go through on a Wednesday morning,
right?
How do you adjust your team? And this may seem like it's very 101 to a lot of people out there, but we still see a lot of people that are doing it wrong. So
there's a reason why they teach 101 classes.
So how do you adjust your roster properly on that Wednesday and then again on like a Friday or Saturday?
So at first on Wednesday, after I've acquired new players, I will make sure that if I'm swapping defenses and kickers, that they've made their way into the right slot. because very occasionally, for whatever reason, they may wind up on your bench rather than in your lineup. So you make sure all of those are right. You bring in the bye week people from the week before and anything like that. Any injuries you need to swap out. So players playing, players not playing. You need to account for all that. And I will just set my lineup based on like the look of it. And frankly, the projected points is like the place where I would start. And we always talk about ignoring the projected points, but they're always right there. I wish you could turn it off, frankly, but you can't. So, it's just kind of there.
High difficulty expert fantasy leagues where all you can see is the last name of the player.
The last name of the player. I just want to see Williams, and I have to guess which Williams I have.
Is that Johnson from USC?
You can see their college.
Or how about you just get the photo, the profile photo of the player, but not any other information?
Oh, God. I think we know that even less because everyone wears helmets. So I'll just set the lineup without consulting any sort of reference material. But what's most important is that when you have a flex position, either a super flex, regular flex, any kind of flex position where you can slot in multiple positions into one spot, you need to make sure that that player is starting as late as possible in the week so that you have the most amount of options to swap them in and out in case anything happens. So you don't put your last wide receiver in the flex position. If your team starts a quarterback and 2 running backs and 3 wide receivers and a flex, just a normal regular flex, and you have a 4th wide receiver you want to start, you don't put the worst wide receiver in that spot. You put the wide receiver who's playing on Monday night or Sunday night or whatever, the last position in there. Because if for whatever reason they don't play, say something goes wrong in practice, or nowadays the player comes down with COVID on Friday,
sure,
then you have the most amount of options. If you have a Thursday night player in your flex and they start and play on Thursday night, then you're locked into starting those 4 wide receivers on Thursday night. And you can't, swap them out for a running back later on and stuff like that. So one of the things I saw all week long was Thursday night players, Saturday night players, all starting in the flex. And it's just poor lineup management. And at a time in the league when there's basically chaos, lightly controlled chaos going on, you need to give yourself as much flexibility as possible, and you need to pay closer attention to how you're setting your lineup. It may or may not burn you, but when it does burn you, what happens is, and as a commissioner, I know this, people will go crying to the commissioner to help them change their lineup. And as a commissioner, you should not be allowing those changes. There is nothing that the site or there's nothing that screwed over the fantasy manager in that position other than the fantasy manager's poor management.
Sure.
And you should never excuse that for people. You should say you have to live with what you did.
Rub his or her face in it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. You need to take a screenshot
personal.
of their lineup. This has not actually happened. I mean, years and years ago, people have asked me to fix it, but this has not happened to me for years. But I still see people starting the wrong players in the flex, as in, you need to take the Thursday guy out of the flex, put a different player in the flex. Keep starting the Thursday guy, but I don't know. It just it sort of triggers me as like a guy who just plays too much fantasy football, talks about it all the time, and tries to educate people as to the best practices. That's a terrible practice. It's something that you can easily remedy, and all it takes is 10 minutes if you have lots of leagues.
Yeah, so what I think it also signifies as far as on the behalf of the person who might have put the wrong player in the flex position is that they are not checking their lineups and going to get new people or moving people around as much as someone who maybe is more involved is. Because if they start something at the beginning of the week and it looks the way they want it to look and they never check back, things like games being flexed to different times of the week.
There you go.
Or anything to do with the COVID issues that have occurred, certainly, like you brought up, could cause for those flex players to suddenly have a different time and date for their game anytime during that week. And so what I usually do is just go in and look at the times, and whoever has the latest game of the players that I want to start, I just throw them in the flex spot. But I go in there every day or every other day and look at them all to make sure that that's still the case.
Yeah, and even if you're going to wait till Thursday to do it before the Thursday game, it's still plenty of time to make all those changes. But don't wait until Sunday to make those changes, because you may have left a guy in on Thursday, and you may realize, oh, I don't have the ability to start the 3 good running backs I have because someone just came back from bye.
Yeah.
So
Sounds good.
If you guys have questions about this, if it's not clear, just ask us. You can hit us up in the chat. You can send us an email. Dave gave those out earlier. Thanks for giving out my email address, Dave.
Yeah, you got it.
Dave@drinkfive.com.
I'll even dox you. I'll dox Jason. Yeah. You already know his name, so how hard could it be?
I mean, I have a more common name than you do, so.
Mine's not very unique either, though.
No, it's not. I mean, we're pretty generic suburban white guys.
Yeah.
So
can't get around that, man.
I guess that helps. It's a
I'm not sure what that helps.
I don't know what that helps. I don't know where I'm going with this. Let's have a quick drink, and then we'll talk about actual football.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers. Get yourself some beers.
Yeah, I'm going to open up this blueberry cocoa stout.
Like we mentioned earlier, we will be talking about lineup questions later in the show. So if you have something you'd like to mention and you are watching the live broadcast on YouTube, then just load up those questions. Give us some information about whether you're in a PPR or a half PPR or a standard league, and what you'd like us to answer for you. We'll get to those in probably 30-40 minutes.
So as we do every week now, lately, we'll go around the NFL, talk about some headlines. Want to kick us off there, Dave?
Okay, sure. So around the NFL, from Cam Inman, as a 49ers beat reporter, he said that the 49ers' Elijah Mitchell's knee issue has taken a positive turn. That's in quotations, and he'll be
I don't think you want knees to turn, really.
And he'll be a game
I'm
night
confused.
A game night decision on Thursday. Now the thing was, Elijah Mitchell was on the COVID list, and that's no longer an issue. He's concussion protocols.
Right.
And he's gone through concussion protocols.
There's too many protocols.
Yeah, a lot of protocols. So he went through concussion protocols, but he still had a lingering knee thing. What is a good thing is that it's taken a positive turn, according to them. However, I have seen earlier today that he is going to be out for this game in Week 16. So Elijah Mitchell can be taken out of your rosters, and Jeff Wilson Jr. will again be the lead back. The problem with Jeff Wilson Jr., even though he played a pretty good game last week, they're up against a more difficult opponent this week, and I'm not sure that Jeff Wilson is going to produce the way that you might want him to on that offense.
Yeah, the Titans, I believe, are giving up the fewest or second fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs.
Yeah, and later we'll talk about are the 49ers playing the Titans this week?
Yeah, they play on Thursday night. That's the Thursday night game. Tomorrow, 49ers at Titans, 7:20 p.m. Central Time. Local time as well. So, yeah, the Titans are giving up the fewest points against to opposing running backs.
Gotcha.
A cumulative 16.07 points to a team, which is very low.
Yeah. So it's a tough call, but for those of you who maybe waiting for Elijah to come back, he's not going to, unfortunately, myself included. It would have been nice to have him here. If he's able to get healthy enough to play in the championship week, he could be very much a sleeper candidate to score 15 to 20 points and win somebody their league.
So you would hold on to him?
Yeah, you always hold on to the guys that can score 20 points.
Yeah, but I mean, we've only got 2 weeks left. If there was any kind of shadow, if there was doubt on his Week 17 availability, I would think you wouldn't hold on to him, right?
There's got to be some other player on your bench that
worth dropping.
Doesn't have as much upside unless you're in an 8-person league.
It's true. He's got a lot of upside.
Yeah. So now talking about Leonard Fournette and Dalvin Cook, who are tied for second place in the NFL at the running back position in red zone carries with 41 red zone carries.
That's a lot of carries.
But Jonathan Taylor has 73 locked up in that first place position and pole position. And Jonathan Taylor, I know someone that Jason is very fond of this year.
I am.
Now, did Jonathan Taylor lead you to a fantasy playoff, or do you just have him on teams that you appreciate having him on?
Not yet. He's on my dynasty team, so I look forward to having him stomp all over the place for the next couple of years.
Gotcha. Certainly anyone with Jonathan Taylor after the first couple games of the season, where I believe he started slow-ish.
He did. I actually talked about this in my column this week. Jonathan Taylor, in his first... What was it? In his first 5 games, he was not on the field for more than 55% of snaps. He averaged 65 yards per game, and he scored only 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
He's now the 4th highest scoring player in all of fantasy football for half PPR leagues in 2021. And one thing I was interesting to see last night, in full PPR leagues, Cooper Kupp is number 1 now.
Yeah, I saw some people saying earlier in the season, when I say earlier, I mean this past week, if you were drafting in a redraft league that was half PPR going forward as the number 1 pick, would you take Jonathan Taylor, Cooper Kupp, or what's his face from Tennessee?
Or Derrick Henry?
Derrick Henry. And it's actually a tough decision to make.
Yeah.
At least especially from right now, not able to reflect on the season, because Cooper Kupp has been head and shoulders above. Derrick Henry is absolutely a force. Jonathan Taylor has shown his ability, like Derrick Henry has in past seasons, to power through any injuries and make it to the other side.
Yeah, he has really. I mean, there was that headline earlier in the season about Jonathan Taylor hasn't missed a practice since high school or something like that.
Right.
That's crazy.
Which they shouldn't start talking about, because that's just the beginning.
Fully expected him to tear his ACL the next week. So we'll hope that maybe he doesn't hear this.
Chiefs Tyreek Hill, along with cornerback Rashad Fenton, tight end Blake Bell, Travis Kelce, and the kicker Harrison Butker all landed on the COVID list this week, with rumors of more to come. We might see the Chiefs and Steelers game get pushed back to Tuesday if things don't turn around, based on the NFL's willingness to do that, regardless of what they had said earlier in the season.
Yeah, so if I recall correctly, the initial statement by the NFL early in the season was that they won't postpone games. They'll force teams to forfeit if teams aren't being vaccinated and following protocols, and then have an outbreak. But it seems like most of these outbreaks are despite the fact that teams are more or less following the rules. That being said, I do know that I read today Harrison Butker is not vaccinated, so he'll be out for 10 days. So he definitely will miss this game regardless of moving it or anything like that.
Yeah, there's a new kicker that will come in for the Chiefs. What's interesting about this situation for fantasy playoffs is the fact that if you are without Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce as a team in the NFL, the Chiefs, that is a major blow to your offense.
Oh, yeah.
That could cause you to lose a game, even to a team like Pittsburgh, who's barely over 500.
You know what they would need to make up for that is like a really good quarterback.
Yeah, well, Mahomes has played the gamut of horrible to good this year. So.
You're right. He was quite good last week, but only like in the comeback stage.
You get the good Pat or the bad Pat out there.
You know, he's mostly good Pat. We've seen bad Pat this year, though.
I have to say that if Hill and Kelce both don't play, and I think that Kelce has more of a chance than the others because he was on the COVID list more earlier.
Okay.
If Tyreek Hill doesn't end up playing the game, the Steelers' defense, which is pretty healthy and showed really well last week, could end up pulling off an upset against the Chiefs.
Sure. I mean, they did play the Steelers, that is, play an awful team who turned the ball over like 4 times.
But in order to turn the ball over, you also need the other part of that equation. It
takes two. It takes 2. You're right.
But yeah, this is not out of sorts, not out of the conversation that the Chiefs have a major falling step. And I know that you may have a team in the playoffs with Mahomes as your quarterback, for example. But it's something to think about. If they don't have the weapons, there could be major issues there.
I do not, thankfully. But you never know who's going to go down tomorrow.
Yeah. Bengals running back Joe Mixon will practice today. And Zach Taylor was saying, I think Joe's feeling pretty good. All the news that I've seen on Joe Mixon is that he will end up starting this game going forward. Samaje Perine, who's the backup running back there, and in some situations a 1B, has done really well. when he's been forced to fill in as a starter for Mixon. But Mixon, as many of us have talked about over the past several weeks, was one of the highest scoring running backs over the last 4 or 5 weeks.
So the last 3 weeks, he's been not good at all. It was basically every week before that, he was doing great.
There was an ankle injury or something like that.
Yeah, so he's still getting a lot of work. 19, 18, and 17 carries over the last 3 games. Not as much action in the passing game necessarily, although sprinkled throughout the season was 0 target games anyways. What we want to see out of Mixon is touchdowns. What we want to see out of Mixon is like the ability to help the offense move the ball. So they played Los Angeles, Chargers, San Francisco, Denver, all teams with respectable defenses. They played Baltimore this week, another respectable defense, and then Kansas City the week after, a defense that has played really well as of late. So, I don't know what to expect out of Cincinnati, to be honest with you. Every time I think I have an idea of how that team is going, they go the other direction. So I'm going to withhold judgment on them and say it's Mixon. He's still one of the top talents. He's going to get a lot of carries. You still got to start him.
Yep, exactly. So if he is starting, he is a start. The guy in my rankings is going to end up being pretty high up. But it depends on whether or not he is actually designated as a starter or not. So we'll have to look and see what happens. Per Darren Urban, who's a Cardinals beat reporter in an open part of Arizona Cardinals practice today, he didn't see James Conner or Rondale Moore. Arizona's game is on Christmas, which is Saturday, so Conner and Moore will need to practice on Thursday. This is basically their Friday tomorrow to have a chance at it. Conner could just be getting veteran rest. I've seen numerous articles and beat reporters pointing to him being the 1A no matter what now, and that's how he's being viewed. And if he is, then that means that generally they don't have to practice all week until the last day of practice. Mm-hmm. And that signifies that they'll be healthy enough to go forward. But it's a possibility that Conner doesn't play. He's played, 14 games now, which is more than he played in the last year that he was with Pittsburgh, where people started to get the idea that he was injury prone. Of course, people have injuries. Doesn't mean they're injury prone.
I mean, what does it mean? Someone's clumsy?
Yeah.
Or it just has weak ligaments?
Stop hitting yourself. Some people are. Some people actually are injury prone. I feel like.
Yeah, but you can only really judge that after the fact, I feel.
Yeah, after 8 seasons of not playing 10 games.
Right, after they go out every year, whatever. But he's played 14, 13, 10, 13, 14 games every season he's been in the league.
He plays most of the games.
Right.
But that's different from guys that play all of the games.
So he's got 3 games left. If he gets 100 yards a game, he can have his best season of his career because he's never topped 1,000 yards. He's already at his highest touchdown total of his career.
1,000 rushing yards, right?
1,000 rushing yards. Yeah. He had 1,400 yards from scrimmage his second year in Pittsburgh, and he has over 1,000 yards from scrimmage this year already.
But it's important. This is one of these things that's important to look at because Chase Edmonds, here's a guy who was on IR, came off of IR, is still available in a lot of leagues, and is still the guy that started as the starter for the Arizona Cardinals. So if Conner can't play, he's going to be going up against the Colts, who give up the 4th least fantasy points to opposing running backs. Not a great matchup, but he's a guy who catches passes in the backfield and would be active a lot in that game with no one else beneath him except for Benjamin. So a guy to look at as a possible fill-in if you're one of your major running backs are like a Mixon or an Elijah Mitchell or someone who might be out this coming week. So,
and really, the Colts have been great against running backs. They would probably be number 1 if it wasn't for the 40-point game against Leonard Fournette.
Yeah.
Because they have not given up more than 17.9 to any other player. That was Derrick Henry in week 3.
Yeah, that's impressive to Henry.
Yeah.
Jared Goff just tested positive for COVID-19 and was placed on the reserve COVID list today. He may not play this week, and later we're going to talk about some wide receivers on the Detroit Lions that we think are good plays going forward. But if Goff is not the quarterback there, we can't necessarily recommend their play. So something to temper expectations on the whole Lions offense. And it's sad to me.
You're not a David Blau fan?
I don't know. So
I had to look that up.
The Lions offense beginning to come together. Deandre Swift and Jamal Williams both coming back from issues that they had. And so now it seemed like everything might be good for them to win a couple games, to look good at the end of the season. And they were doing that. They were making upsets. They were creating offense where people were writing them off. Yeah. But now this setback could be a huge problem. Goff could perhaps come back and play the game still. We don't have all the details available. So something to watch very closely over the next couple days. And I think that's it, Jason. Unless you have something to add, we can move into our next segment here.
No, I mean, as always, pay attention to when people are practicing. Pay attention to, if you have players on the COVID list, you got to see, like, anybody should be reactivated by, I think, as late as Sunday morning if they're going to be playing. So this time of year, if you're in the fantasy playoffs, there's no excuse for not paying attention. This is why you've played fantasy for 4 months.
That's right.
Is to get to this point. So we shall drink to making it this far.
That's what you're here for, right? And Jason and I would do this show regardless if we had teams in the playoffs or not. But spoiler alert, there are a lot of teams between us in the playoffs, and there generally are every year.
If I had a year that I didn't make the playoffs, I would just generate more leagues so that it didn't happen again.
Well, you should be, as a fantasy expert, I would think, generally in at least a couple of playoffs each year.
Sure. I made only 2 of 6 this year.
Doesn't always happen.
Yeah, it doesn't always happen. Want some of this?
Yeah.
So we'll go over some upside plays, upside acquisitions for week 16 and 17. Now, with the change in schedule last week, your league may have pushed waivers back. I know some platforms were doing that automatically. I believe ESPN was one of them, but don't quote me. Check your league's rules, of course. But, for example, our leagues in Flea Flicker, it was left up to the commissioner to change it manually if they wanted to. I opted not to. I didn't want to throw everybody a curveball.
Well, it is awkward to have a bunch of games on Tuesday night and then also do waivers, and not something that people think top of mind.
Right.
But we've done this before now. This isn't the first year that this has occurred. And granted, a lot of leagues, including one big one that I'm in, didn't have a league last year because they were worried about things not making sense, or like what the NHL is doing right now, which is maybe even combining weeks, which doesn't make sense for fantasy at all.
So the NHL basically canceled most of their games in the last couple of weeks. I think it's been at least 2 weeks now.
Yeah.
Then they're going to suspend the league for like 4 or 5 days, which they normally do over Christmas anyways. One year, a player got cut on Christmas Day, and the owner's wife was so upset about it that she made the owner start a rule that no transactions can be made on December 25th or 26th. So there are owners out there
must be Canadian,
who are humans. It probably was. So anyways, the NHL is taking off. They canceled everything for like a 4 or 5 day span.
That's coming nobody would watch it over
later
Christmas.
This week. I think that they would. I mean, I don't know. Well, they're still doing like
football's on, man.
In Minnesota, they're going to have the Winter Classic on January 1st. But anyways, the big news for them, and we'll move back to football, I promise.
Yeah, please don't make this a hockey podcast because I'm out.
They were scheduled to go to the Olympics, and they have canceled that.
Canceled them going to the Olympics?
The NHL will not be participating in the Olympics. They will not be sending their players to the Olympics. So they're going to reschedule all the games during that time, because what they did was they cleared out a period of time where there weren't going to be any games during the Olympics. They are canceling all that now.
Sure. So
because of lots of reasons.
So you're just saying they're worried about scheduling because of all the things going on.
Well, there's a lot of issues with traveling to China and stuff like that right now, and that's where the Olympics will take place.
Sure.
So, the NHL is a league that's been affected by COVID as much as any other league. And when you talk about not playing fantasy football for a year, it's because crazy things like that can happen. And I know you and I last year, before the season started, sat down maybe 3 or 4 times just to brainstorm all the possibilities and what we would want to do in those situations.
Well, that's why we should do some commissioner podcasts, for example, maybe in the off season or maybe during some of the time next year. But I like the concept of talking out the alternatives and seeing what people have done, bringing in other commissioners and interviewing them about issues they've had.
Yeah.
And I think what you're referring to is we even had scenarios in our Dynasty League where we already know what will happen with the payouts and with the playoffs at every step of the way.
Right. If they cancel in week 10, we know what we're going to do.
Yep, we have it laid out.
We don't have to come up with it. We could tell people
it's already on paper
before the season started what to expect.
Yeah.
And I think that's the strongest way to run a league is that, for everything you can think of ahead of time, let people know what will happen. And for all of the rest of the scenarios, then you just need to be as fair as you can.
Right. It's like your local government or even your national government, wherever you might happen to be. They probably already have rules that you have no idea about, but will come into effect.
Right. And there's a big, long document somewhere that you can pull up.
And everybody was like, well, I didn't read that. And they're like, well, it exists.
Maybe in your local quadrant. If you can't be bothered to go read it, then it's not our fault.
Oh, H2, G2. Upside acquisitions and plays for week 16 and 17. And Jason and I will switch off with some guys here. I wanted to start off with the quarterback position. Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback of the Miami Dolphins, 75% owned in flea flicker leagues. Now, he's averaging 16.5 fantasy points over the last 4 weeks, Jason. He's been somewhat disappointing this year after a strong midseason effort.
Yeah.
That's 22 and 29 fantasy points against Jacksonville and Atlanta, respectively, this year, earlier in the season. With that said, he finished as the QB 12 last week against the Jets, and he goes up against the Saints in week 16, who are giving up the second most points per game. That's 19.9 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. Now, the Saints actually are a good defense, have been and continue to be.
They shut out the Bucs last week.
But that's for a different reason.
I think so.
Tom Brady lost all his toys.
That's a huge part of it.
I mean,
although the Buccaneers have not beaten the Saints in the regular season in the last 2 years. They're 0-4.
Fair point. The Saints have always been a problem for the Buccaneers.
Yes.
Much like the Steelers can't beat the Bears for some reason.
That's weird.
With Devontae Parker scoring his first touchdown since week 4 and Jalen Waddle coming back off the COVID list to play this week, Tua should have plenty of toys as well, in spite of what's happening in Tampa Bay, I guess, to put up high-end quarterback 2 numbers in the fantasy semifinals. So, going against the Titans in week 17 is a tougher but winnable matchup for Tua. He should be a solid QB2 there. But what I like the most is this week against the Saints. Again, the Saints, what I was saying is they are a good fantasy defense. They put up a lot of points there, but regardless of how well they do as a fantasy defense, they're still putting up almost 20 fantasy points or allowing 20 fantasy points per week for the quarterback.
Yeah.
And so I see Tua as having a good game. Slotting in for injury, for issues, for possible matchup problems.
Possible COVID stuff that comes up later in the week. I mean, if you're in a 2-quarterback league, you may still, Jared Goff could be one of the guys in your rotation. He won't be available, probably.
Jared Goff is a new guy that popped up after we already did our notes for the show.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect opportunity to play a guy like Tua who may be available in your league, especially if it's not a 2-quarterback league where I would expect Tua to be owned.
That's true.
But you should definitely start Tua in a 2-quarterback league unless you have a biz problem, which we refer to heretofore as having both Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady on the same team.
And on a single quarterback league. Oh, you got to make sure you pick the right one. That's very important. Mm-hmm. You don't want to start Tom Brady the week that he scores 0 points.
Negative.
Anyways, at running back, Ronald Jones, speaking of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 67% owned. That was yesterday's ownership number. I don't know. I assume he was picked up in a bunch more leagues today.
I updated it today.
Oh, thank you. So 67% owned. With Fournette out for a week or two at least, as reported by Ian Rappaport, Jones looks like he'll be a great play against the Panthers, and then they play the Jets in week 17. I believe every single week for the last 2 months, I have said start your running backs against the Jets because they are god-awful against running backs. They are giving up so many more points than other teams to opposing running backs. It's not even close. So he's not likely to get a ton of work in the passing game, but he's going to be the primary ball carrier, and that will be an explosive offense because they will be so angry at not scoring points. They're going to have Antonio Brown back from suspension. He comes back this week.
Yep, and apparently he's looking fine as far as
finally healthy.
Well, a lot of people were saying that maybe he has gotten out of shape for whatever reason, etc. But this is just the normal crud, and Antonio Brown should be back and willing to go out there and do exactly what
Antonio
Tom Brady
Brown
needs.
is definitely an up and down player, but generally speaking, when there's been a lot
He's
of
never been out of
crap
shape.
about him, yeah, I'm never worried about that. But when there's been a lot of crap about him, he comes back and he plays well. He may not play well for 5 weeks in a row, but he'll play well next week.
Yeah, guy comes back like the least you can expect of him out of this offense with no Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. And Mike Evans is still a toss-up, I believe.
But definitely no Chris Godwin.
Yeah, it would probably be for him to get like 6 for 80 or something. That's like your floor with Antonio Brown with Tom Brady in this
I would
matchup.
concur. And Rob Gronkowski, same kind of floor there. And then they've got some other options. They have Brashad Perriman and
Yeah, Perriman also comes back this week, so they will have receivers.
and Scotty Miller.
Yeah, but
It's at least guys that Brady's familiar with.
yes.
He's not throwing to a bunch of guys who are catching the ball and going, "Oh my God, I can't believe I caught a pass from Tom Brady."
Yeah, they'll have receivers.
You know, at least there's guys who've been there before.
Yeah.
So I like the Ronald Jones start this week. I think that, especially the week after in Week 17. And then Duke Johnson. So he had his first 100-yard rushing game of his career, his first 2 rushing touchdown game of his career, and it may be that he's found a starting role on Miami. So I wanted to bring him up for one big reason, and that's because he had a huge game, and it looks like he'll be the starter on a team that really struggled at the running back position because Myles Gaskin was not impressing anybody with his 3.5 yards per carry average. So Duke, it's a fine pickup. I like that, but I only like him in an emergency situation because he is playing against the New Orleans Saints and then the Tennessee Titans, the teams giving up the two fewest amount of fantasy points against. So they are surrendering almost nothing to opposing running backs. You can't necessarily count on a guy who is just being slotted in while he looked good last week. That was against the Jets.
Yeah, and kind of like what I was mentioning earlier, I think Tua and the wide receivers there have a good chance to play out over the last 2 games of the fantasy playoffs. But the running backs on the Miami side are probably not going to see too many opportunities.
I agree.
But Duke Johnson is a very good guy to bring up because he's owned by so little, by so few people, rather. And he's still a guy who could be out there scoring a touchdown and 60 yards, which is certainly more than enough points to slot in for one of these guys who isn't going to play.
Right. He's going to be probably a high volume but low production kind of guy.
Good flex play if you need
high
to
volume,
have somebody
touchdown dependent.
I mean, you remember there are leagues that are
But don't just throw him in.
We're in leagues that are 12 people, but there are leagues that are 14, 18. There are leagues that have even more than that. So the shallower the available waiver wire, and the deeper your bench goes, based on the volume of people that are in the league,
Sure.
the more you need these kinds of guys.
Yeah.
So talking about that a little bit with 2 guys that are also less than 50% owned in flea flicker leagues, I'll go into wide receivers Josh Reynolds and Amon-Ra St. Brown, both from the Lions. Now keep in mind that we did just talk about Jared Goff being on the COVID list, and I'm not sure that we should trust these receivers without Goff there, but the game scheme and offensive play calling should be the same. At least on Amon-Ra's perspective, we should probably look at him as still being a high target wide receiver for this upcoming week. Josh Reynolds is more of a guy I think that has done well because he's with Jared Goff, who he had an existing chemistry with from all of his years on the Rams.
That helps.
So Josh Reynolds, 23% owned, claimed by the Lions back in early November after being released by the Titans. Of course, reunited him with his former quarterback, Jared Goff. Now, Jared Goff and Josh Reynolds set career highs for Reynolds, 52 receptions and 618 receiving yards, before becoming a free agent after the 2020 season.
He earned Josh some money, that's for sure.
Because we have TJ Hawkinson out, that is opening up targets for these guys that would normally go as little put-off passes to TJ. And you can see that more in Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's 49% owned, And should you be playing receivers on the Detroit Lions? Yeah, I think you should. As long as you think the situation is steady and stable enough for you to call it on the semifinal or championship games. But a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown over the past 3 games has had 11 targets on average and 2 top 10 positional finishes. Not something to scoff at, not something to glaze over. The first time this happened, it could have been something that was just a blip on the radar. But because it happened multiple times, now we look at it as a trend.
Sure.
Amon-Ra is their greatest offensive receiving threat.
I mean, he's probably the greatest offensive threat on the team that's healthy.
Deandre Swift is back.
Oh, is he back?
Yeah.
I didn't think he was healthy.
Swift and Williams are both back this week.
Okay. See, I assume that they were both not playing still. So
yeah, they're both back. But Amon-Ra is someone to totally grab and play. Now you're going to have to measure if Goff is still out, if you are willing to try to roll those dice. But looking at the amount of targets he has in that offense, he's still going to be targeted by the offense, regardless of who is under center. So granted, I wrote this afternoon. It's changing a little bit with Goff out. But if Goff was to come back in, it's exactly the same. And even if Goff is out, Amon-Ra St. Brown will probably still finish as a wide receiver 3 or flex territory for the week. So he's still worthy of a start, regardless of the guy throwing him the ball, in my opinion.
So, yeah, and that would be David Blau, or I guess Tim Boyle. Was it Tim Boyle who started earlier this year?
Sounds familiar, but
so those are the 2 quarterbacks that they have.
I try not to pay too much attention to the Lions.
Yeah, Tim Boyle went 15 for 33 for 15 of 23 for 77 yards and 2 interceptions.
Not so great
against Cleveland in Week 11. Perhaps they decided to go with David Blau, who started 5 games back in 2019. So we'll see what happens with them.
Well, let's move on to the tight ends, and we can
Sure.
we can glaze over some of these quick ones here.
Yeah, so we've got Cole Kmet owned, tight end for Chicago, 52% owned in leagues. So the waiver wire pickings are often random for tight end. What you're looking for is a guy who can get you 10 points, right?
Who's not random.
I mean, it feels random.
Kmet has been a good tight end all year.
I don't mean Kmet is random. I mean, like, when you're picking a new guy every week, it feels like it gets a bit random.
Okay, well, I try not to stream tight ends, I guess.
It'd be great to draft a guy, but if you don't invest that draft capital, then you're stuck. Or if you have a Darren Waller who didn't play.
I'm only suggesting you don't pick a player at random. It seems like a bad strategy.
Okay, don't throw a dart, even though there are things as dart throws. We'll get to that in a moment. So anyways, Kmet has scored 10 points in 3 of the last 6 games. He's averaging 7 targets per game over that time. So this week the Bears go to Seattle. The Seahawks are giving up the 6th most points to opposing tight ends. So Kmet is second in targets, receptions, and receiving yards on the Bears. So it's not like it's an epic offense, but the next 2 matchups are against the Seahawks and the Giants. Not exactly, great defenses that are striking fear into anybody. So and not that I am this person, but if you think that people are due in certain times, Kmet hasn't scored a touchdown all year.
Who thinks that?
So perhaps he's due.
Gamblers? Get out of here.
If you're a gambler, he's due.
We're gonna roll a 6 eventually, right?
I'm not, gonna worry about Kmet this week. I think I have the tight end position solid in my 2 playoff leagues.
But Kmet has been a valuable asset for Justin Fields or Andy Dalton or whoever the quarterback is there.
Right, he's played well under both of them. I was looking actually at his individual games earlier in the year just to be like, he plays well with one or the other, but he plays well with both.
I actually liked him as a dynasty asset to begin the year. The only problem with that was that the quarterback play was so poor over the year, regardless of who was slotted in for the Chicago Bears, that he just can't be included in that short list.
Yeah.
But he's almost there, right? That's the reason. He's like a bridge guy who's bridging between a possible every week starter and a random tight end prospect.
So, Brevin Jordan, tight end for Houston, 18% owned. So, if you do need that dart throw at tight end, maybe you have a guy who winds up going down with COVID on Friday or something like that, and there aren't many options left, he should still be available late in the week on your waiver wires. He has 3 touchdowns in his last 6 games. He had 7 targets in his last game. He did not play last week, although he was active because of a hand injury. So keep an eye and make sure he practices this week. He is in a good spot if you lose your last-minute player because they play the Chargers, who are giving up the second most points to opposing tight ends. So that's a great little spot start if you want to, if you not want to, if you are forced to ditch whatever tight end that you are planning on starting this week, and have to grab someone off the waiver wire. On the kickers, as we mentioned, like with Harrison Butker, who was put on the COVID list on Monday, and it was let loose today that he will be out for 10 days because of his vaccination status or lack of vaccination. He will be out week 16. Here's some kickers that you can consider. Greg Zuerlein, 81% owned, has at least 8.4 points in each of his last 8 games where he attempted a kick. There was a game there that he sat out. There was a game there where they didn't attempt any kicks. Nick Folk, 76% owned. He's the top scoring kicker in the NFL. He's going against Buffalo, so there should be a lot of offense in this game, unlike the first time that those two teams played.
He's only 76% owned because he had a bye week late in the season, and people just decided not to pick him up.
I just picked him up in 2 leagues earlier today to replace Butker.
And I
could not believe it.
He's had a plus sign, which in most leagues signifies that he's questionable every single game that he's played the entire year.
And that's just a Belichick thing. Tom Brady was questionable every single game of his career in New England.
Well, good for you for picking him up. I've had Nick Folk in many leagues, and I have him still in several fantasy playoff leagues, and I don't understand why there's not more fanfare associated with Nick Folk.
And the guy who I did pick up when Nick Folk wasn't available, Evan McPherson, kicker for Cincinnati, 35% owned only. Last week he made kicks of 53 and 58 yards. He had a game earlier this year where he made 4 50-yard field goals, or maybe 3, and another field goal. He's the 5th highest scoring kicker on the season.
Yeah, I think people get
only 35% owned.
People get complacent with the guy that they have, and they don't look and see what's available.
And look, I trash kickers and defense all the time,
yeah.
But everything is important in the fantasy playoffs. This is important. Spend a little bit of time, look over your waiver wire, figure out who you want to start, consider their matchup, consider how their offense is playing. You can invest 15 minutes in figuring out your kicker.
Those things are also important in the regular fantasy league.
Fine. I'll take your word for it.
All right.
And at defense, the Philadelphia Eagles are 38% owned. This week they play the Giants, giving up the 10th most points to opposing DSTs. The Giants just gave up 16 points to the Cowboys last week. The Eagles have Washington coming up in week 17. The New Orleans Saints, 72% owned. They get Miami, then Carolina. Last week, the Saints put up 18 points against the Bucs. Both Miami and Carolina are giving up top 10 points to opposing DSTs. And the last option here I have for you are the Los Angeles Chargers. Their upcoming opponents are Houston and Denver. So if you think that Davis Mills and probably Drew Lock, starting for the Broncos, can generate points for your defense and special teams, then you are right, because those guys will turn the ball over. They are not great quarterbacks yet.
Yeah. I also like Miami, the Miami Dolphins defense's fantasy playoffs. Over the last 4 weeks, the Dolphins have been the number 6 defensive unit in all of the NFL, holding opposing teams to an average of 9 points. And they've been getting turnovers, and they're getting a Saints offense that literally can't do anything but run the ball. When they can't run the ball, can't do anything.
Yeah, but they have Taysom Hill, so they're going to be able to run the ball.
Okay. Well, just saying that I think there is sneaky play that's top 10 defense for this particular week. And Miami is an undervalued defense and has been for the whole season.
All right.
Let's go ahead.
You've been on the Miami train several times this year.
Yes. Let's go ahead and talk about audience lineup questions. Let's see if we have some from the chat room. Right now we have a question. You have to bench one for the semifinals. Who are you benching? Debo, Deontay, Antonio, or Keenan? Now, do you know all their last names?
Samuel, Johnson, Gibson,
Brown,
and Allen. Oh, Antonio Brown.
Yeah. So
he hasn't been playing, so it didn't click.
So you have to bench one for wide receivers, and you have Debo Samuel, Deontay Johnson, Antonio Brown, and Keenan Allen.
Okay, so Debo plays on Thursday night against the Titans. That, just because it's Thursday night, is my initial pick. But then again, Titans are giving up the second most points to opposing wide receivers. So I don't know how I feel about that.
So I'm gonna bench Antonio Brown out of those guys. I think they're all awesome, but the guy that comes back from injury, that comes back from not playing, is very unpredictable. More unpredictable than the others.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that.
But that's a good
Who are the
place
Steelers
to be
playing
in,
again?
right? A good place to be in, the Kansas City Chiefs.
Okay, so the Chiefs are, doing a lot better against. But then again, they don't. It's Deontay Johnson and then the rest of the receiving core there.
Yeah, he's going to get 10 targets in that game.
Yeah, and Keenan Allen's going to get lots of work as he always does. So Antonio Brown there.
But it sucks and is great at the same time to have that particular problem.
What a great problem. Why don't you consider flexing one of them? But
But
remember, pick the guy who starts at the end of the week.
assuming you have a flex position. Brooks Rig Trupp asks, in a PPR format, which 4 do I play to get to the championship? And I have CeeDee Lamb, Mike Williams, Van Jefferson, Amon-Ra, A.J. Brown, and Jalen Waddle. So which 4 come out to you?
So
as the
there's 1,
strongest?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in that group. So we have to eliminate 2 essentially. A.J. Brown is returning from injury this week, but they have no one else to throw it to per se. Waddle coming back from COVID again. Coming back, you're not always sure, but Waddle has been so good. Amon-Ra is probably one of the guys who would be on the outside of this, just because it sounds like we'll be without Jared Goff this week. CeeDee Lamb, you got to start. Mike Williams is like, what do you call him? 6 points or 20 points?
Yeah.
He's done 6 a lot lately, so maybe he's due for a 20. There's being due again. And Van Jefferson is another one of those guys that are like very boom or bust.
So you said what I
like
think.
CD. I like Waddle. And you got to pick some boom or bust guys here. So Mike Williams probably has the highest floor of all the boom or bust guys because he'll still get 6 catches. It just might be for 40 yards. And then I guess I would roll out A.J. Brown because he's got the highest ceiling.
Okay.
What do you like there?
So I disagree with your premise that you have to start boomer bust guys. I don't think you need to start upside. I was thinking about this to myself.
I'm just saying that there's 2 good starts there and 4 boomer busts.
I don't think that it's necessary to have any boomer bust players. I think it's better always in all situations to limit your exposure and to play consistent and stable points.
Okay.
Rather than trying to get upside that could bite you in the ass.
So who do you like?
So I would take out Williams and Jefferson. Take out Mike Williams and Van Jefferson from that lineup, giving you CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra, A.J. Brown, and Waddle, all of whom should have the highest amount of targets as a floor.
They'll have the most targets on their respective teams.
Yeah.
I see where you're coming from with that.
But, I mean, you can be the...
we both agree that Van Jefferson is sitting there. So essentially what you're saying is you would start Amon-Ra St. Brown over Mike Williams.
Yeah, because regardless of his quarterback position, Mike Williams could easily score you 5, where Amon-Ra in PPR is probably going to get 5 targets in the first half. Max 42404390, which is
rolls off the tongue.
Is almost enough for a phone number. I don't really know what that is. Schultz or Gesicki this week in standard scoring, and who would you play?
I would go with Gesicki. We talked about how Tua is probably going to keep swinging up, and we'll talk in a moment about Dak Prescott. And I'm not impressed with what he's been doing lately, so I would go with Mike Gesicki.
Okay, that's fair. I have them pretty close. I don't really do standard rankings as a rule. I do half PPR rankings and then adjust accordingly based on the amount of targets that the receivers are getting. And so I would go with your gut. And I don't disagree with Jason that the Cowboys offense has had trouble putting the ball in people's hands over the past couple weeks. I like Tua and his receiving threats over the next 2 games, so we'll go with Gesicki.
Okay.
Jay Goldman 33 asks, do I start Jalen Hurts over Dak Prescott?
He said,
this week?
do I start? Let's get it right.
He did.
So Jalen Hurts over Dak Prescott. I think so. I mean, Jalen Hurts is the worst great quarterback in the league. And because he still has that great fantasy ceiling, and Dak Prescott has not. He has 1 touchdown, Dak does, in each of the last 3 games. Has not gone over 238 yards. He's not running the ball at all. You know, he has 11 total rushing yards over that time.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Lenny B13 asks, running back 2 this week for my team. Do I pick Joe Mixon, Miles Sanders, or Ronald Jones?
Oh, that's a great collection of RB2s.
Yeah, so assuming that that Mixon is going to play, do we start Joe Mixon or Miles Sanders or Ronald Jones?
So I did not see Miles Sanders last night, but he apparently had 18 carries for 131 yards.
He was great. They're actually giving him the ball now. It's I don't understand why it didn't happen earlier in the season.
That's 2 weeks in a row, 42 total carries now.
But I'm considering starting him in my starting lineup
Plus
in the semifinals.
3 and 2 receptions. They play the Giants next week. I like that matchup.
I have Ronald Jones higher, however, in my rankings than because of the explosiveness of the Tampa Bay offense.
Yes, and I was just going to say, because Tampa Bay is going to be out for blood because of, their lack of production last week, the Panthers are going to get creamed, and there could be garbage time. And if it's garbage time, it's going to be plenty of Ronald Jones.
But I like Jones and Sanders, especially because I know I said picture that Mixon is playing, but currently we don't know if that's the case. So with the 2 guys that are more likely to retain their current positions within the teams, I think Ronald Jones and then Sanders. Now keep in mind too that we talked up Ronald Jones, and sure, he's in a great theoretical position, but this could be a situation in which he goes out and fumbles, and it's Giovanni Bernard and Keyshawn.
No, Giovanni Bernard is on the IR.
Oh, well, then it could be Keyshawn.
It won't be Keyshawn Vaughn.
I'm just saying.
I know, but
these things have happened.
Really don't like Keyshawn Vaughn. It's amazing that he's still on the roster.
Well, you can toss away my suggestion, but there is a distinct possibility that Ronald Jones doesn't have a good game.
Sure, I mean that's possible for anybody. So would you say that Sanders has the higher floor?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say.
And Jones has a higher ceiling?
Yeah, that Jones could be...
Jones' ceiling could be a Fournette type game.
Yeah, he could score 30 points out there ridiculously, but Sanders will probably get you 12 points no matter what happens.
Yeah.
And so it's tough. But I would not start Mixon unless there is solid news that he's going to be the starter, and the Cincinnati Bengals look like they're going to do really well because
the Bengals are playing the Ravens.
Because who knows with that interdivisional game?
Yeah, anything could happen in the AFC North.
All right, well we have 2 more, unless there's anything else from the chat room that you can see.
So what we've got is an Ertz or Pitts. So Zach Ertz or Kyle Pitts this week. Arizona is going to be playing the Colts.
Ertz or Pitts?
And Pitts on the Falcons will be playing the Lions.
I like Zach Ertz. What do you like?
So Kyle Pitts is been quietly one of the best rookie tight ends that the NFL has ever seen.
But not scoring any touchdowns.
And the Cardinals' offense has really struggled.
What you mean is Kyle Pitts is a wide receiver that's doing pretty well.
He's doing fine for a wide receiver. He's doing excellent for a tight end. I think I would have to go with Kyle Pitts.
Okay, well, I currently have Ertz ranked 5 and Pitts ranked 10, but anything could happen. The reason why I think Ertz is a better play this week is because he's going to score a touchdown, whereas Pitts is statistically unlikely to do the same.
That's, statistically. Or maybe, Dave, you know what I'm going to say? He's due.
I don't like this.
I don't like it either. I think it's absolute nonsense. I just like the concept.
Do you have some kind of gambling message board where you guys just say to each other you're due? Is that
so and so is due? I mean, whenever it's said, I hope it's a joke and people don't actually act on it.
All right,
you got to keep it light, right?
Ayo, it's Linneo asks Kyler Murray or Tom Brady this week.
Good reading of that handle there, Dave.
I am a reader, yes.
Tom Brady.
LeVar Burton taught me how to read.
Oh, cheers to the reading rainbow.
That's right.
And Tom Brady.
So Tom Brady versus Kyler Murray. I'm going to take Kyler Murray over Tom Brady. Again, we like to think that Gronkowski and Antonio Brown are going to be enough for him to overcome the inequity that he has at the wide receiver position right now.
Tom Brady got shut out for only the 3rd time in his career last week. Okay. Tom Brady will throw the ball to the damn water boy, if that's what it takes to score touchdowns this week.
Clearly, Rob Gronkowski by himself is not enough. And if I've learned nothing from paying attention to my fiancée Jessica not starting players after they are injured, then I would start Antonio Brown. I guess.
Don't know what you're saying there, but
it becomes more complicated as the podcast goes on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I have Kyler Murray at 5 and Tom Brady at 8. And I think that Tom Brady can, in any game, be the top scorer. But more generally, I think that Bruce Arians is going to try to win this football game through running the ball and managing the game, as opposed to Tom Brady just trying to throw for as many touchdowns as possible.
Yeah, I just think that the Colts will be able to continue to keep Kyler Murray from having explosive games, like he was, like has been the trend lately.
I think they just had a bad game versus the Lions, but we will see.
They certainly did have a bad game against the Lions. Of all the games I was updating you on Sunday, that was the most fun.
Thanks. B-Town 79 asks, Week 16 playoffs flex PPR. Who starts for me? Devin Singletary at New England, or Antonio Brown at Carolina, or AJ Green versus Indianapolis, or Jarvis Landry at Green Bay. So we need a flex position. Is it Singletary, Brown, Green, or Landry? It doesn't have to be a color. Now Singletary was recently sort of anointed finally after the entire season is basically over.
Yeah.
The starting running back role of the Buffalo Bills.
How often did the Bills bother to run the ball against New England?
And what's great is that since Josh Allen has like a little semblance of a leg or ankle injury, it looks like that might actually carry forward.
To me, this is between Antonio Brown and AJ Green. If you, like Dave, believe in Kyler Murray, then I think you would have to go with AJ Green.
He's a real person, Jason.
Or like me, if you believe in Tom Brady, then you would have to go with Antonio Brown. I guess it depends on which of those two quarterbacks you think will do well this week. Although, frankly, I would lean AJ Green just because he has been more solidly incorporated into that offense, and he has now moved up into the main spot, whereas I could easily see Gronkowski getting the most targets for Tampa Bay this week. So I'm mostly on the AJ Green side of this.
I gotcha. Well, I would start Antonio Brown over all those guys.
Okay, so we pick a Cardinal and a Buck, and then a Cardinal and a Buck.
So what we're saying is we think those offenses are going to score some points.
Yeah.
Maybe in spite of themselves, but gosh darn it, they're going to do it.
Okay, so we have one more question, and it's a kicker question, so we're going to ignore it. No, I'm kidding.
What is this? Look, if you want to ignore the kicker and defense positions, fine, but you're not going to win any fantasy championships out of that ridiculous attitude.
Greg Joseph or Daniel Carlson. I have to admit, I don't know what team Greg Joseph is on.
Vikings.
Okay.
Now, I was at the Vikings-Steelers game, and I learned firsthand from all the Vikings fans that every time that Greg Joseph lines up to kick, the entire fan base of the Minnesota Vikings takes a deep breath and just imagines that it will be a horrible situation. And that's not because of Greg Joseph necessarily, but because of the last couple kickers they've had.
Because they live in a frozen hellscape?
Yes, that. But also because the last couple kickers they've had have put them into bad situations, lost playoff games because of it. All those things have occurred. If you remember, their last kicker got wrapped up in like a scandal. He was the guy who played World of Warcraft, and I forget his name. But he was a guy that people really liked, and he was even like on Reddit forums.
Wasn't he in a band?
And then
Chris Cluey.
Yeah, Cluey, and he ended up like getting canceled as one of the first people to be canceled. Anyway,
he's in a band called Tripping Icarus.
I like Greg Joseph, and one of the good reasons to like him is that the Rams that are going to be defending against the Minnesota Vikings are going to be holding them a lot of times to not getting touchdowns, and that's one of the shining beacons.
One of the things you want to have happen when you're starting a kicker.
Yeah, to pick kickers, but Greg Joseph has not shown himself to be one of the most accurate kickers in the NFL. Whereas Daniel Carlson, going up against Denver, he.
I feel like the same thing could happen to the Raiders. They'll move the ball, but they won't. They won't necessarily be scoring touchdowns. Partly because they don't have the big playmakers. Partly because Denver's defense is respectable. So yeah. I would go with. I would go with Carlson.
Well, what I would generally do in all of these circumstances is look at the defensive team that they're going up against, and see what the fantasy points versus opposing kickers is, and then think about their defense as far as like if a team is able to get into the 40, 30, 20-yard zone of that opposing team, how likely do you think it is that Denver or the Rams can push them back out of field goal opportunities?
So the Rams are giving up right in the middle, the 16th most points to opposing kickers. The Broncos the 24th most. The difference between the two teams is basically 1 point.
Yeah, so I like the idea of Minnesota's offense being able to drive the ball down into scoring territory more than the Raiders, because they have Jefferson and Cook, and the guys on the Raiders just don't have stand-up players like that.
Sure, but I look at guys like Jefferson and Cook, and I say they're going to be way more likely to find the end zone than the guys that Jacobs and Zay Jones. But the
Rams' defense is better than the Broncos' defense.
It's true. That's why this is a question and not a given.
It's a toss-up, and one in which I take Greg Joseph.
We've landed on the opposite side of a lot of these either-ors today.
He takes Daniel Carlson.
Okay, and another question from the chat. Van Jefferson or A.J. Green PPR? I think we would both agree on this one. It would be A.J. Green.
I don't think so.
Wow.
I think I would take Van Jefferson. Let me think about that for a moment.
You seem to be down on A.J. Green at the moment.
No.
Even though you like the Kyler Murray this week.
I saw Odell Beckham not really being used at all, and I think that maybe there were a couple games where he was getting passes, but that whatever was being used to defend him previously has kind of bubbled up to the top.
I mean, we're talking about Van Jefferson, not Odell Beckham, though.
Yeah, but it's an important thing to discuss the other player that is a downfield threat.
So Minnesota is giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers. The Detroit Lions. Oh no, who does Arizona play this week? I forget.
The Colts defense is third against fantasy wide receivers.
Third best.
Yeah, this is why. Again, either situation could happen, and I have AJ Green that I may start, but I believe on a team that I had a choice between those, and I have Van Jefferson in currently. That same scenario. And I think for me that it's just more likely this particular week versus those particular opponents that Van Jefferson scores more fantasy points. That's it. I have more that I'm falling on that sort of fantasy points against kind of
interesting.
philosophy.
So I would have to go with AJ Green still,
right,
just because he's the primary receiver on that team, and then Cooper Kupp is the first and second receiver on the Rams. So I guess our answer is you have to pick between us.
What's great?
Who you like more?
What's great about having
will dictate who you start.
A secondary guy is that he's not the guy who's covered by the main defensive back.
But that doesn't seem to matter for Cooper Kupp. In PPR, he has 6 games over 30 points.
But we're not talking about Cooper Kupp. We're talking about the secondary wide receiver, right?
That's true.
We'll see.
We will.
And there's no way that people can agree on the same stuff day in and day out anyway. But
that would be a boring podcast.
According to my rankings, AJ Green is just buried a little bit because of how good the Colts defense is.
Okay. So thank you all for having a listen this week. Good luck in your playoff matchups. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and to follow us on Twitter and hit us up on Instagram, on Facebook, all of the good places where you can get all of our information. Go to our website, drinkfive.com. Later this week, we will have the rookie report. We will have confidence picks and maybe some surprises as well. You'll be able to go see all of Dave's rankings. And good luck on Sunday. Join us next week for the final week of fantasy football.
Final week.
Cheers.
Okay.